Thank you, Mike and Vint and Google for hosting this. It's a wonderful event. I always like it here, and it's not just the food. I'll be back up here actually on February 7th. I'll be doing an Authors at Google event that will coincide with my being up here for the NASA Innovative and Advanced Concepts Symposium, which will be taking place at Stanford, where we analyze and advise regarding some of the more far out and speculative grants that NASA gives out to very strange, well, not sci-fi strange, but strange possible new disruptive technologies. At some point in my talk, I'll discuss some of those. Another little piece of news I want to get out of the way first is that down at San Diego, UC San Diego, we've started the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination, which is very, very interesting approach. It basically, it was started on the 50th anniversary of C.P. Snow's famous speech, despairing that universities were split with a chasm between two cultures, the humanities and scholarly pursuits versus scientific pursuits, where they weren't even speaking the same language, and building hostility between them. Whereas at UCSD, every single department and every division signed on to participate in this study of the imagination and the arts. And I think this is highly relevant here because one of the things, well, I'm happy with that because my brain is split with all sorts of fissures and then knitted back together like Frankenstein over this business of, can you mix the art and the humanistic with science? And I think that communications that empower people, that enable them to have some room to breathe with their ideas. This is one of the great glories of the internet. I know some of the people who served on Al Gore's senatorial committee long ago when they passed, the United States Congress passed a bill that no one, the least cynical person alive, would have expected powerful men and women to do. And that's take something that was already turning into something of real value, the internet, and simply going, fly, fly, fly everywhere, fly everywhere. It turned out to be the greatest strategic jujitsu move that our nation and civilization could possibly have done. But the notion that they knew what they were doing when they did that, I mean, that's utterly bizarre. But somehow they had a notion that something like what we've seen in the last 25 years would happen. In any event, I'm here to talk about the big context for the disruption-tolerant networks, or delay-tolerant networks, and that is our future in space. And there have been some very, very powerful dreams set in space, the final frontier and all that sort of thing. And over lunch, Vint and I were talking about how 120 years ago, there were people who thought that the American dream would fade and that our psychology would become more like the stodgy, class-ridden psychologies of older nations as soon as the frontier closed. And there was a famous book during the closing of the American frontier in the 1890s that worried that this would happen, but with the possibility left in the air that we would find other frontiers because the habit was so deep. And this was one of the reasons for the burst of enthusiasm for the final frontier that we all those of us who were old enough saw during the 60s and into the 70s. And then it started to get overwhelmed by the curmudgeonliness we see around us in our culture. And I won't go into it right now, but I believe 2014 may, for certain reasons, be the year that we start turning around on that. In any event, this is a graphic that sort of, it's not mine, but I borrowed it. It's a graphic that sort of shows what we've been doing in exploring the solar system with ingenious robots. And it shows the number of missions that have been sent to Mars, to Venus, to the moon. And it's a little bit obsolete, but it shows, you know, the farther out you go, the more difficult it is. And yet we've been very ambitious, and we've sent out 4 brave interstellar explorers, one of whom is still working out there and sending us back information. Now, how likely is it that we're going to get a burst of activity back in space? Well, I'll tell you one source, and that is the worrisome imbalances in wealth and income distribution that people are talking about today. Well, you know, there's an aspect to this that may not be so bad, and that is that when you have all these concentrations of lordly aristocratic wealth, you get an awful lot of the power of whim. And some of the people are going to be like Lorenzo de' Medici. They're going to want to do interesting things with this money. And one of the options that I talk about in my novel, Existence, is the notion that you're going to have amateur rocketry, people blowing themselves into space, or maybe blasting is a better word. There is a proposal for a company that is offering, for only $1 billion for the first one, to set up independent commercial tourism landings on the moon. And it might only cost $1 billion. Well, that's whimsical on one level, but on another, there are people on this planet who might say, sure. In any event, what we're preparing for is a public-private combination of effort that we last saw in the 1920s and the 1930s. In other words, we might be ready at last to enter the barnstorming era that was long delayed because space is a lot harder than putting together rickety little crates of spit and baling wire, as happened when we were first doing aviation. But we may be ready for that phase now. And that was where we saw that predicted. And this is an example. This building exists. This is the Spaceport America in New Mexico, not very close to White Sands. And this is where Virgin Galactic is thinking of doing most of its launches of a major endeavor for private tourism into the thresholds of space. And they are hoping to be the place for horizontal launched space tourism. Now, this is a context of the big context of cislunar space. And it shows the Lagrangian points. And a couple of these Lagrangian points are now becoming part of a national policy in that when President Obama switched our focus from the moon, which I quite agree is a fairly sterile place to look at in the near term, although the billionaires are welcome to go there, to asteroids, that the trailing or leading Lagrangian points would be very good points to gather and experiment with both asteroidal resources and the techniques that we would need to go to Mars. Now, asteroids, you can see in the upper right, there are a lot of places on Earth where they have hit just in the last 100 million years. And Congress has demanded that NASA try to track these things. And we've been discovering more and more of them. And as a result, we've characterized the possibilities and planetary resources. Some of the people in this valley right here are backing this notion of going out and trying to see if the notion of asteroidal resources is worth exploring. Because unlike the moon's surface, where the only thing you can really think of that might be valuable, except on the poles, might be helium-3, which is highly speculative since we don't know how to use it yet. Asteroids, on the other hand, have tremendous possibilities. And they're talking about possibly using solar-powered tugs to move small chunks into cislunar space where we could experiment on them. And it was tragic that the Russians shoestring mission to Phobos failed because Phobos could be one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the solar system, especially if it's made of carbonaceous chondrite material, which would have a lot of water. And this would be the ideal marshalling place for making fuel for return voyages that would then enable us to explore Mars considerably more cheaply. And all of this is based upon work done back in the 1980s by Professor John Lewis, who is now Emeritus Advisor to Planetary Resources. And he figured out all the way back then that if you got a 1-kilometer asteroid of the right type and melted it down, now that's an undertaking, but if you did that, you would be able to get the entire world's iron and steel production for a year, the entire world's gold and silver production for a century, and the entire world's platinum group elements production for 1,000 years. Now, mind you, this would get you rich, but not quite as rich as you'd calculate, because the prices would go down, to which we should all say, hooray, because we all in this room have better uses for that stuff. So the potentiality of getting rich that way, and thereby perhaps stopping tearing into our mother planet and being able to afford, getting so rich we could afford to turn her back into a park, that is the ultimate win-win scenario, or positive sum game. And then, of course, we'll have a new ecological war over pollution in space, okay. But the possibility of utilizing these resources would then change the balance in the argument, so for instance, of space-generated power, which right now isn't really a winning proposition if we had to launch the stuff out there, but if we could use space resources and refine it. Mind you, this melting and refining of asteroids is some deal. What they're hoping to do first with planetary resources is to put a baggie around one of these chondrites and let the sun simply heat it and get the water. Because water alone is incredibly valuable in orbit, and you can turn it into rocket fuel or life support. But there's enough material out there to make 3,000 Earths if you flatten it, 3,000 Earth surfaces. And you could turn this into wonderful things. The movie Elysium, for all of its silliness, was the first time we saw in motion pictures some of these possibilities. And of course, it can get pretty extravagant, the dreams that people are talking about. If they could build stuff like this, several thousand of these, then half the population in the solar system would not be living on Earth. I like this especially because as you get older, you just move uphill toward the poles, like Heidi's grandfather, and the gravity gets lighter. And one of the things that we may build with these resources would be the beanstalk, and that's the space elevator. It's difficult, but possible to build one that would work up to Earth orbit, up to geosynchronous orbit, at which point the entire solar system becomes very cheap access, because we'd be able to simply the electricity cost of the change of MGH would away from being in space. Now, there's another type of body out there. I did my doctoral dissertation figuring out how these guys worked. And it was very nice of the Europeans to send a space probe past Halley's Comet 3 years after my dissertation was accepted and to prove I was right. Thank you very much, anybody from Europe. And I managed to get double duty out of it by turning it into a novel. But this is the guy that we were just talking about. Thank you, Chris. And Mars looks a little bit different here, doesn't it? Well, this is how it's portrayed by Kim Stanley Robinson in the third of his Mars trilogy, Blue Mars. The trilogy is Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars. And this is what Mars would look like if all the low areas were filled with the water that we now estimate is there. So it is quite conceivable that our great-great-great-grandchildren, about when they would become immortal, because they would need several thousand years, might live to see something like this. In the short term, the project that I actually have some affection for is Dennis Tito's proposal that we send, he wants to recruit an older married scientific couple on the one time in 30 years that we have a chance to loop past Mars and get a free return like we got on all the Apollo missions. Therefore, they would have to carry no propellant to Mars. Therefore, we could conceivably launch during that window in 2018. But nobody's ponying up the money. My wife pointed out to me that we both have PhDs in planetary science and our kids are off to college. At which point I went, I guess I'd get a lot of writing done. But the frustrating thing about that mission is you would swoop past the night side of Mars and never land. Oh well, I'd so. Now, here is an interesting part of the solar system you may have only just heard about. Many of you have heard of Europa's buried seas. That Europa has an ocean underneath a roof of ice that protects the ocean. What a lot of people don't, and some of us have heard that Enceladus, one of the moons of Saturn, also appears to have this, with geysers coming up, the Cassini mission, which I want to talk to you about because I think that the DTN system would change the economics of whether or not we would dump missions like Callisto into, which is the plan to dump it. And I think that we could come up with a system by which that would never be done again. But the point is that it is now believed that all of these small bodies have buried water, liquid water. The number of roofed worlds might be in our universe might vastly outnumber those that have this strange surface water that we have here on Earth. And in Titan's case, the bizarreness that there may be when we land on Titan, there may be cryogenic wax creatures living by methane seas. And underneath them, rock-hard ice. Underneath, there's molten water, which is to them like lava. And in that lava might have a completely different kind of life. Absolutely amazing. But here's the new news. You don't see this guy on this list. Ceres. Just a few days ago, it was announced the Herschel space probe discovered water vapor erupting from Ceres on 4 different occasions. So, and this is not flex heated by gravitational tides. There's 2 totally different heating mechanisms that might be at work than the tidal force. And I can talk about those later. Now, what's the context of this, of all this? Those of you who saw Woody Allen's Radio Days, you felt that as if Woody Allen had promised us 5 billion more years. And he was all depressed that that the Earth was going to fry after 5 billion years. Sorry, we get at most 200, 300 million more years. And, well, unless we take charge. Because the gradual warming of the sun, one of the things that, I want to make sure I'm not using up all my time. One of the things that may be unique about our Earth is that we skate the inner edge of what's called our Goldilocks zone. How many of you have heard of the Goldilocks zone? That's the continuously habitable zone around a stable star. And with the Kepler discoveries, we have been finding some extraterrestrial planets, extrasolar planets, orbiting their stars at the right distance. Because of the way Kepler is discovers things, it's biased, so it will not find very many of these. But down the road, General Warden's working on the sequel to this, and we'll be finding more and more of them. But here's the point. It appears that the sun's habitable zone extends all the way past Mars, but just we skate just along the inner edge. And that inner edge has been moving outward for, billions of years. And we're right at it now. And this is why the Gaia balance of our atmosphere is pegged at having almost no greenhouse gas. This is why a little bit of greenhouse gas can disrupt us and cause problems, because we have to have an almost perfectly transparent atmosphere to emit the infrared so that we stay balanced with liquid oceans and a decent biosphere. But as you go out from where, if Earth had been 10 million miles farther out, we would have reached a Gaia balance with more CO2. And farther out, more CO2. The tragedy of Mars is not that Mars is far out. If Mars had been the size of Venus, we'd have a sister water world right now where we could land in shirt sleeves but have to have breathers to keep the CO2 out because there would be so much of it. So that's the situation that we're in right now, is that the Earth skates the inner edge, and within the next 200 million years, there's almost no more time for somebody to replace us if we blow it, in other words. We have to get it right. Earth has one chance, us. But if we are smart, there may be opportunities to move the Earth. And if there are times in question and answer, I can tell you how it's all to be done. Okay. Now, the context, it goes outward from, we've talked about the solar system, and it gets out there into the cosmos. And it's called Fermi's silent cosmos because Fermi, it's named after him. It's called the Fermi paradox. I called it in some of my papers the Great Silence. And that is the irony that the folks about 20 miles from here at the SETI Institute have not been able to find anybody out there. And they thought for sure there'd be all these beacons, Jodie Foster and all that kind of stuff. And they haven't found anybody. Now, there's still a lot of space and a lot of the cosmic haystack, frequency space, latency space, all these things. We haven't sampled very much of it, but we do know that it looks a lot emptier than we had thought it would be. And one of the tools we use for that is called the Drake equation. And many of you have seen this before. That is a way of calculating an estimate of how many other advanced life forms there ought to be in the galaxy. And you take the number of stars, stable stars in the galaxy, and the fraction of them that are stable, the fraction that have planets, the number of planets they have, the fraction that develop life, the fraction that develop intelligence, the fraction that develop civilization. And these are all filters that might winnow the number on the left side of the equation, and that led to us. And if any of these numbers are much smaller than we expected, well, that would explain it. And we're just a fluke. On the other hand, there are factors on the right side, and that is the biggest one: how long an advanced civilization lasts. Do they destroy themselves as soon as they get nuclear weapons? In which case, we're an anomaly. Who'd have thunk that Edward Teller would be right, that we would actually step back from the brink? Oppenheimer didn't think we would. Well, are we going to be able to solve our ecological problems? Are we going to be able to create a long-lasting, insane civilization? Very, very interesting. I happen to think that the internet is a major part of that, that the sort of free and open, diamond-shaped social structure that we developed in our civilization is probably rare, and that most human civilizations were shaped like a pyramid, with a few at the top lording it over ignorant masses below, and felt dedicated to keeping it that way, and therefore squelched science and competition from below. This diamond-shaped social structure may be so rare that that may be one of the... I've cataloged 100 explanations, but that's one of my favorite 12. In any event, will we make contact? Will we find others? And if we don't find others, will we make others? In other words, you have people in this valley right here, hotbed of people who want to create artificial intelligence. And it turns out there are 6 major paths that they think might bring us to artificial intelligence. And of course, the scariest is that it emerges from the complexity of a computer system without our suspecting it or knowing it. That's the source of Skynet and Terminator. I personally think I'm much less afraid of a military computer which has lots of off switches than I am of high-frequency trading programs. More money is being spent on artificial intelligence by Goldman Sachs than by all the universities in the world in order to speed up these high-frequency trading programs and make them more ferocious and more savvy at leap. And their fundamental ethos is predatory, parasitical, and secretive. Excuse me. I'd rather get my artificial intelligence some other place. Thank you very much. But there are other things on this illustration. The possibility that I talk about in some of my science fiction of uplifting some of the animal species that are crowded against what seems to be Darwin's glass ceiling. Every year we find out some other animal species is smarter than we thought they were. Last year was prairie dogs. That prairie dogs see a person walking through their town and they describe him, what color he is, or whether it's a she. The prairie dogs actually describe people walking through and whether they're familiar or not and what color sweater they're wearing. And yet they all seem to have bumped up against this roughly the same, dolphins and chimps are a little higher, but roughly the same level. Except us. And we crashed through. What? How? Why? It's not that I'm ungrateful, but weird. So there are all sorts of ways in which we may add to the diversity of our human civilization, even without meeting aliens. That we might solve our loneliness by welcoming artificial intelligences or modified intelligences. Turning around and saying, we're the first to get up here, here's a hand. Here's a hand up. In any event, I talk about that in a few books. Now, how can we uplift ourselves? And I'm going to get back to the topic here of education and taking advantage of the distributed nature of this wonderful education system that we have called the web, gaming, all these things. Here's a concept that, that the head of the Clark Center and I came up with for a computer game and museum complex. In a few places there would be this beautiful place where you would do this in person, but most people would do it remotely by game. And that is that people would go from creation station to creation station. At the first one, they would pick a star. And it would be highly educational in whatever level of detail that the visitor, either by web or at the museum, wanted. And if it's a busy Saturday and the kids are running through, they would take their card, each kid would have a card, put it in the first station, big red button, bang, you chose a hot star. Watch out, it'll burn out fast. So you get little two-sentence pedagogy. Then you chose a wet planet, and so on, going all the way. And as you go, the tree of life possibilities get smaller and narrower until at the end you have your own unique alien race. And in that respect, it's similar to Will Wright's Spore, except he uses creative design and we use evolution. He didn't like it when I said that. But in any event, then you take these things to the extraterrestrial terrarium or exorarium, and you play encounters, contact encounters with other people's civilizations, and it's live experiments in empathy, in anthropology, in negotiation, or 99% of the time, war, sure. But all of this leads us to the big question. And this is the question of how silent is it out there? As I said, I've been in this field. I've been writing papers in SETI for 30 years, and the collection of possible explanations is vast. There are more than 100 categories of explanations for why we might be alone, many of them of low plausibility. But one of them is that failure modes trap the other bright candidates out there. And they might trap us. But there is a serious possibility that we might be the expected ones, that we might be the ones who can get out and help everybody else. Now that's a daunting image. That's daunting. Because the natural 20th century reflex is self-flagellation. To say, we're so awful, we're so terrible, please come and save us. Either to God or E.T. The possibility that we might have overshot our intelligence, our ability to empathize with each other, beyond some minimum threshold that may have trapped everybody else. And I'm not just talking we as a species, I'm talking we as a civilization that broke away from the pyramidal social structure. This lays open the fundamental question. If we're first, perhaps we're the ones to light up the galaxy. So, I think I put out enough possibilities there to open up for questions. But and if we can get to the end of the questions, I have one more little treat to show you. But I thank you for putting up with this, shall we say, extravaganza. So, thanks. Because of my book, The Transparent Society, actually most of my speeches have been about this whole, NSA secrecy, privacy thing, and I have to thank you for letting me go back to my first love. If folks are too intimidated by the size of all of this to ask questions, I can show you this other thing.
Show us your trick, and I do have a question.
Oh, please, that's higher priority. Well, let's see now. How do I? Is this a trackpad or not? Oh, I see. It's one of these old guys. There you go. All right. Well, let me just. Please forgive it if it seems somewhat shameless for me to show it to you, but I'm so proud of how it turned out that. Oops. Wait. Stop. I need sound. I forgot to mention that. I need sound. Yeah. Oh, I got sound. I got it. Now
we need it to be plugged in.
Yeah, it's going. What I need to do is start. I need to do big screen. I'm almost there. Where's the big screen thing? Is that it? All right. And then I need to go back. How do I get it back? Hold it down? Oh, I see. Hold it down. All right, so if there's anybody who has the lights.
I thought we were supposed to light up the universe.
All right, okay. It's just 3 minutes, so be patient. This is the artwork by Patrick Farley. It's gorgeous stuff. But books don't have trailers. I said. I hope you will find that less self-serving than just the proud sharing of an artistic moment that some say is better than the book. Yes, Ben.
David, actually, I'm glad you showed us that for two reasons. The first one is that you may have just generated a new advertising genre, and of course we're very interested in things like that here at Google. Another opportunity to make money. The other thing, though, is that this really, your challenge is quite interesting. What if we are, in fact, supposed to go light up the galaxy, so to speak? Here we are, screwing things up left and right with our petty little fights and everything else. What a responsibility you've just thrown on our shoulders. What made you do that?
It is truly, truly daunting to think of that. It's so much more comforting to be, cynicism is so much more comforting. You know that. You all know that how you all were bullied on the playground every time when you were little kids by people who weren't as creative as you, but could be your equal by simply sneering at whatever you were enthusiastic about. And I think this is one of the terrible things that's happened to America lately. And as cynics of the far left and the far right have been deriding our genius, not just as Americans, but as members of the civilization of hopeful people, at saying, let's negotiate, let's figure out a way to get the positive sum game. And if there's any concept that you should be spread with missionary zeal, it's that notion that in most civilizations the pyramid was zero-sum. The lords knew that they could only have by taking. But we operate in a positive-sum civilization in which it's possible that somebody can get rich by helping everyone else to get rich as well, only not as rich as he is. Richer than they were. So anybody else out there with questions? And we can talk about disruptive.
One thing that I would like to overemphasize maybe is that what you heard today was very much in sync with what you just said. You saw people taking ideas and turning them into reality. By the way, that's engineering. It turns science fiction into reality, and that's what this is all about. That's what the whole day has been about, is taking ideas and turning them into something positive, constructive, and useful. And I hope that you'll stimulate more people this way. Forget about the NSA crap and talk on this point repeatedly over and over again everywhere you go, because that's what we should be all about. We should be about exactly this. And this is what we saw
all through the day. Everyone, if you had one common theme, it's whether it was some of the technical people or the people who were involved in helping save the world and improve things through education and connectivity. It's the empowerment of people to engage in positive sum enterprises, and I'm proud of all of you. Yes.
Another opportunity that you might want to put in your slides is the asteroid detection and deflection, which actually one of the co-founders, Edward Lu, who worked here, a former astronaut who worked at Google Earth, he and Rusty Schweikart founded. And what they're doing is they're building a Sentinel mission. It's infrared device, it rotates the sun so that it can map the asteroids.
Well, this is B612?
Currently, we only see 1,000. Pardon?
This is B612?
B612. It's named
Right.
after Little Prince asteroid,
Right.
and it's B612 Foundation. And so it's asteroid detection and deflection. So it's an
Yes.
opportunity where everyone can sign up and help save the planet.
Well, the development of amateur science is, I think, one of the major themes that I didn't get to here, and that is that the one monotonic theme across the 20th century, you had ups and downs of fascism and communism and all those things, but the one monotonic thing was the tendency to increase our reliance on specialization and professionals. It was the age of professionalization that started in Sumeria, but it's reached the point right now where it simply cannot have any more doublings. You cannot double the number of professionals in America anymore. But just in time, what's happening instead is a countervailing phenomenon called the age of amateurs. And what we're finding out is that human beings are larger than we thought they were. And Vint and I knew this, some of you knew this, because we hung around some of the great minds of our time, and we all know that the greatest scientists had artistic hobbies. All the greatest scientists I ever knew had almost professional level artistic hobbies. I'm told that when I was 4, my father took me to watch Einstein play the violin. And so we are multiple, we are many, and I think more and more creativity is going to be seen coming out of our avocations. Yes, sir.
So on an optimistic note, I was going to sort of paraphrase what I think is a Churchill quote, but I'd like to think we'll do the right thing after we try everything else.
It pretty much defines America. Thank you very much.